His crown was a lie she believed. Bianca Vitali had always believed she was untouchable. But when her father lost everything, when his empire crumbled beneath him, she realized the truth: she was collateral. And the man collecting the debt was Matteo Greco. He tilted his head, watching her with dark amusement. "Your father played a dangerous game," he murmured. "Now, I make the rules." Chapter 1. The Crumbled Empire's Shadow. The news had arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of expensive paper, a legal document, stark and unforgiving, outlining the complete and utter ruin of the Vitali Empire. Bianca Vitali, at 57, had always considered herself a woman of steel, hardened by decades of navigating the treacherous currents of her family's world. Yet, as she reread the cold, precise language detailing the seizure of their assets, the loss of their holdings, the evaporation of their power, a tremor, faint but undeniable, ran through her. It wasn't fear, not exactly. Bianca had stared down fear many times. This was something deeper, a chilling sense of displacement, of a world tilting on its axis. The Grand Palazzo, their ancestral home overlooking the glittering expanse of the Bay of Naples, suddenly felt less like a fortress and more like a museum, a relic of a bygone era. The scent of lemon blossoms, usually a comforting reminder of sun-drenched summers, now carried a faint undercurrent of decay. The familiar murmur of the city below, a constant hum of life and activity, sounded distant, muffled, as if she were already separated from it by an invisible wall. Her father, Don Alessandro Vitali, a man whose very name once commanded respect and fear in equal measure, sat slumped in his study, the fire in his eyes reduced to embers. He looked smaller. The imposing figure who had dominated her life, the man who had taught her the intricate dance of power and survival, was now a shell, his shoulders bowed under the weight of defeat. He didn't meet her gaze, his attention fixed on a half-empty glass of amber liquid, the ice long melted. "It's Greco," he finally said, his voice a hoarse whisper, devoid of its usual commanding resonance.
Matteo Greco.
The name hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Bianca knew the name, of course.
Matteo Greco.
The rising star of the Greco family, a rival clan whose influence had been steadily encroaching upon the Vitali territory for years. He was known for his ruthlessness, his intelligence, and his chillingly calm demeanor. A man who operated with a surgeon's precision, cutting away at his enemies with calculated efficiency. He was also rumored to be devastatingly handsome, with eyes that could pierce through steel and a smile that could charm the devil himself. Bianca had always dismissed such talk as hyperbole, the stuff of whispered gossip and fearful speculation. Now she wondered. "He played me," Alessandro continued, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and self-recrimination. "He baited the trap, and I walked right into it." Bianca moved to the window, her gaze sweeping across the familiar landscape. The vibrant bougainvillea cascading down the walls, the terracotta rooftops of the city, the distant, shimmering blue of the sea, all of it felt alien, tainted. She had spent her life within these walls, learning the rules of the game, playing her part. She had been a dutiful daughter, a respected figure in their world, a woman who knew how to command respect, how to wield influence. She had buried her own desires, her own dreams, beneath the weight of family duty. She had even endured a loveless marriage, a strategic alliance that had ultimately yielded nothing but a hollow ache in her heart.
"What does he want?"
Bianca asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. She needed to understand, to assess the damage, to find a way to salvage something. Alessandro finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of despair, and was it fear? "Everything," he said, his voice barely audible. "He wants everything we have." "Everything?" Bianca repeated, a knot forming in her stomach. This was more than just a business deal gone wrong. This was a calculated dismantling, a deliberate act of humiliation. He nodded, his gaze dropping back to the glass in his hand. "The businesses, the properties, the palazzo." He paused, his voice catching in his throat. "And you?"
Bianca froze. "Me?"
"He wants you, Bianca. As collateral." The word hung in the air, cold and sharp, like a shard of glass.
Collateral. A pawn in a deadly game.
A prize to be claimed. She had always known that her life was not entirely her own, that she was a piece on the chessboard of their world. But this was different. This was a violation, a stripping away of her agency, her dignity. He cannot be serious, Bianca said, her voice laced with a defiance she didn't entirely feel. Alessandro shook his head, a bitter smile playing on his lips. He is very serious. He made it abundantly clear. Your father's debt must be paid in full. The company, its holdings, and... Bianca looked in her father's defeated face. Her father had been a force, a man who was feared, respected, and obeyed. He had been all those things, and more. She had loved him, and hated him. He had controlled every aspect of her life. For what? For this? You used me, she said softly, the words hanging heavy in the air. Her father did not deny it. He simply looked away. A maid, Maria, who had been with the family for decades, entered the room, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. Signora, she said, her voice trembling, there are men at the gate. They say they are here for Signora Bianca. Bianca straightened her shoulders, the steel returning to her spine. She would not cower. She would not break. She was a Vitali, and even in defeat, she would face her fate with her head held high. She turned to her father, her eyes devoid of emotion. It seems the devil has come to collect, she said, her voice calm, resolute. She walked towards the door, leaving her father alone in the ruins of his empire. The scent of lemon blossoms followed her, a bittersweet reminder of a life that was no longer hers. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that her world had changed forever. And as she stepped out into the fading light, she wondered if she would ever find her way back. Chapter 2. Collateral of a Fallen King. The men at the gate were not what Bianca expected. She had envisioned hulking brutes, scarred and menacing, the stereotypical image of mafia enforcers. Instead, she was greeted by two men in impeccably tailored suits, their demeanor polite, almost deferential. One, slightly older with silver threading through his dark hair, extended a hand. Signora Vitali, he said, his voice smooth and cultured, I am Lorenzo, and this is Giovanni. We are here on behalf of Signor Greco. Bianca ignored his outstretched hand. I am aware of why you are here, she said, her voice cool and steady. Tell Signor Greco, I will meet him, but on my own terms. Lorenzo inclined his head slightly, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Signor Greco anticipated your reluctance, Signora. He has arranged for a car to take you to a location of his choosing. It is for your safety, as well as ours. Bianca bristled at the implication that she needed protection, especially from Matteo Greco. But she also understood the reality of the situation. She was, for all intents and purposes, a hostage. Refusing to cooperate would only make things more difficult. Very well, she said, her voice tight. But I will not be treated like a prisoner. Lorenzo gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Of course, Signora. Signor Greco wishes to make this transition as comfortable as possible. The car, a sleek black Mercedes, was waiting just outside the gate. Giovanni held the door open for her, and Bianca slid into the plush leather seat, the scent of expensive cologne and polished wood filling her nostrils. As the car pulled away from the palazzo, she looked back at the only home she had ever known, a wave of sadness washing over her. The familiar silhouette against the twilight sky seemed to recede into the distance, becoming smaller and smaller, like a fading memory. The drive was silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional muted roar of passing traffic. Bianca stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into a continuous stream of gold and white. She tried to focus on the present, on the immediate challenge ahead, but her mind kept drifting back to the past, to the years she had spent within the walls of the Vitali Empire, to the life she had known, the life that was now gone. She thought of her mother, a beautiful, fragile woman who had died when Bianca was still a child. She had left behind a void in Bianca's life, a void that had never truly been filled. She thought of her husband, Antonio, a man she had married out of duty, not love. Their marriage had been a cold, formal affair, devoid of passion or intimacy. He had died 5 years ago, a victim of a rival family's ambition, leaving Bianca with a sense of relief rather than grief. She had always been a solitary figure, even within the bustling, chaotic world of her family. She had learned to keep her emotions hidden, to present a facade of strength and composure. It was a survival mechanism, a way to protect herself from the constant threat of betrayal and violence. But now, stripped of her power, her status, her very identity, she felt a vulnerability she had not allowed herself to feel in decades. The car finally pulled up to a secluded villa, perched high on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was smaller than the palazzo, but no less opulent, with manicured gardens, a shimmering infinity pool, and breathtaking views. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Lorenzo escorted her to the entrance, where a tall, imposing figure stood silhouetted against the warm glow of the interior lights. As she drew closer, the figure stepped forward, and Bianca finally saw him.
Matteo Greco.
He was even more striking in person than the rumors had suggested. Tall, with a lean, athletic build, he exuded an aura of power and confidence. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to penetrate her very soul. His features were classically handsome, with a strong jawline, a straight nose, and a mouth that hinted at both sensuality and cruelty. He was wearing a dark suit, impeccably tailored, and a crisp white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Bianca Vitali," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. "I have been expecting you." Bianca met his gaze, her chin held high. "Matteo Greco," she replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "You have taken everything from my family. What more do you want?" A faint smile played on his lips. "Everything was merely a means to an end, Signora. What I truly want is you." He said this with a directness that told her it was no manipulation. He wanted her. But for what? Bianca took an involuntary step backward.
Why?
She had to ask, although she felt as if she already knew. "Let us say you are a debt," he continued. "One long overdue. Your father took something from me long ago, and your debt to me is a means to restore the balance. My father took many things over the course of his life. I cannot take responsibility for those things." Matteo stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his cologne, a subtle blend of citrus and spice, filled her senses. "You may not take responsibility, but you can provide compensation." He looked her up and down. It was not necessarily a look of lust, but one of assessment. Like he was planning to do something with her, but had not decided yet. "Compensation?" Bianca replied, a challenge in her eyes. "What is this, a business transaction?" "Everything is a business transaction," Matteo said. "But some have higher stakes." She stared at him, and for the first time, was a little afraid. He was more dangerous than she gave him credit for, because he believed in what he was doing. This wasn't about money or power. It was about something far more personal. "You will stay here," Bianca, Matteo said, his voice softening slightly.
"You will be my guest."
"For as long as it takes." He gestured towards a villa, the warm light spilling out onto the terrace. It looked inviting, almost seductive. But Bianca knew that it was a gilded cage, a prison disguised as a paradise. She had lost her home, her family, her freedom. And now, she was at the mercy of a man who held her fate in his hands. A man who, despite her fear, stirred something within her that she had thought long dead. A spark of defiance, a flicker of desire, a dangerous, undeniable attraction. She would fight him, and she hated him, but she couldn't deny this undercurrent between them. He owned her for now. Chapter 3. The Devil's First Decree. The first few days at the villa were a strange mixture of luxury and imprisonment. Bianca was given a spacious suite overlooking the sea, with a private balcony, a walk-in closet filled with clothes that were not her own, and a bathroom that rivaled a spa. She was attended to by a silent, efficient staff who anticipated her every need, providing her with gourmet meals, fresh flowers, and anything else she might desire. Yet, she was never truly alone. There were always guards, discreet but ever-present, watching her every move. Matteo Greco, however, remained largely absent. He appeared only occasionally, usually during dinner, which they took together on the terrace, the table set with fine china, crystal glasses, and flickering candles. Their conversations were polite, formal, almost strained. He asked about her comfort, her preferences, her needs. She answered with a cool detachment, careful to reveal nothing of her inner turmoil. He was a master of subtle interrogation, weaving questions about her past, her family, her life into seemingly innocuous conversation. Bianca, in turn, tried to glean information about him, about his motives, his plans for her. But he was guarded, revealing only what he wanted her to know. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Matteo leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her face. "You are adapting well, Bianca," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Most women in your situation would be more distraught." Bianca met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I am a Vitali," she said, her voice steady. "We are not known for our emotional displays." A faint smile touched his lips. "Indeed. Your father instilled that in you, I presume." "My father taught me many things," Bianca replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Survival being foremost among them." "And have you survived, Bianca?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Or merely existed?" The question caught her off guard. She had never allowed herself to consider the distinction. She had always focused on duty, on responsibility, on maintaining the facade of strength that her family expected of her. She had suppressed her own desires, her own dreams, her own needs. Had she truly lived? Or had she simply gone through the motions, playing the role that had been assigned to her? "I am here, am I not?" she said, her voice a little sharper than she intended. Matteo nodded slowly. "You are here," he agreed. "But you are not the same woman who arrived a few days ago. I see it in your eyes." A flicker of something. Defiance? Curiosity? Perhaps even interest? Bianca felt a flush creep up her neck. She had been careful to keep her emotions hidden, to present a facade of indifference. But he was perceptive, too perceptive. He saw through her defenses, saw the vulnerability she had tried so hard to conceal. "You are mistaken," she said, her voice tight. "I am merely adapting to my circumstances." He chuckled softly, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Perhaps," he said. "But I believe there is more to you than meets the eye, Bianca. And I intend to find out what it is." He rose from his chair and walked to the edge of the terrace, his gaze fixed on the moonlit sea. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves, "we will begin your education."
Bianca frowned.
"My education?" He turned back to face her, his eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "You are here to learn, Bianca, to understand the true nature of power, of loyalty, of family. You will learn the ways of the Greco family, and you will learn to appreciate your new role." "And what role is that, exactly?" Bianca asked, her voice laced with suspicion. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made her heart beat faster. "You will be my consort, Bianca, my companion, my confidant. You will stand by my side, and you will share in the spoils of my victory." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. He was not simply offering her a place in his world, he was demanding it. He was claiming her, asserting his dominance, making it clear that she was his possession. Bianca felt a surge of anger, a rebellion against his arrogance, his control. But she also felt a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite define. A strange sense of anticipation, of excitement, of challenge. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He stepped closer, his presence filling her senses. "You will not refuse," he said, his voice a low, hypnotic murmur. "Because you understand, deep down, that this is your destiny. This is where you belong." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, a sensation she had not felt in years. She flinched, but she did not pull away. "You are a fascinating woman, Bianca Vitali," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "A woman of strength, of intelligence, of hidden fire. I intend to unleash that fire. And I believe you will enjoy it." He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "your new life begins." He then turned and walked away, leaving Bianca alone on the terrace, her mind reeling, her body trembling. His words, his touch, his very presence had shaken her to her core. She was terrified, yes, but she was also intrigued. She had spent her life in a gilded cage, playing a role that had been dictated to her. Now, she was being offered a different kind of cage, a different kind of role. But this time, there was a spark of danger, a hint of freedom, a promise of something more. She was trapped, but somehow also on the verge of something momentous. The devil had made his first decree, and Bianca knew that her life, her very soul, was hanging in the balance. She was to be remade. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Lost Paradise. The education Matteo had spoken of began not in a classroom or a boardroom, but in the sprawling gardens of the villa. He led her through the meticulously manicured pathways, pointing out the various species of flowers and trees, explaining their origins, their properties, their hidden meanings. It was a subtle seduction, a way of drawing her into his world, of showing her the beauty and the order that he had created. "My grandfather planted these roses," he said, stopping before a bush laden with velvety crimson blooms. He had a passion for them. He believed they represented the essence of life, beauty, fragility, and thorns. Bianca looked at the roses, their petals unfurling in the morning sun. She had always loved flowers, but she had never had the time or the inclination to truly appreciate them. Her life had been too full of responsibilities, of obligations, of the constant pressure to maintain the Vitali image. "They are beautiful," she said, her voice softening. Matteo nodded. "Beauty is important, Bianca," he said. "It reminds us of what we are fighting for, of what we are striving to protect." He plucked a single rose from the bush, carefully removing the thorns before handing it to her. Bianca took the flower, its velvety petals soft against her skin. The scent, rich and intoxicating, filled her senses. "But beauty without strength is meaningless," Matteo continued. "The rose needs its thorns to survive, just as we need our defenses." He gestured towards the villa, its imposing structure a stark contrast to the delicate beauty of the gardens. "This place," he said, "is a fortress. It is a sanctuary, but it is also a symbol of power. It is a reminder that we must be willing to fight for what we believe in." As they continued their walk, Matteo spoke of his family, of their history, their traditions, their code of honor. He spoke of his grandfather, the man who had built the Greco Empire from nothing, a man of vision and determination. He spoke of his father, a man who had been betrayed and murdered by his enemies, a victim of the constant struggle for power that defined their world. "My father was a good man," Matteo said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But he was too trusting. He believed in alliances, in partnerships, in the possibility of peace. He was wrong." Bianca listened intently, absorbing his words, trying to understand the man behind the mask. She sensed a deep-seated pain in him, a wound that had never fully healed. The loss of his father, the betrayal he had suffered, had shaped him, hardened him, made him the ruthless, uncompromising man he was today. "Your father, he was involved in my father's death," Matteo said, his voice suddenly cold.
Bianca stiffened.
She had known, of course, that there was bad blood between the two families, that their rivalry had a long and violent history. But she had never known the specifics, the details of the betrayals and the vendettas that had fueled their conflict. I was not aware," she said, her voice hesitant. Matteo stopped and turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "Perhaps not," he said. "But your father was. And he paid the price." He said it without malice, without a trace of satisfaction. It was simply a statement of fact, a cold, hard truth. And now I am paying the price, Bianca said, her voice barely a whisper. Matteo reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. You are not a price, Bianca, he said, his voice softening. You are a consequence. A consequence of your father's actions, yes, but also an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Bianca asked, her voice trembling. He smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile. An opportunity for redemption, he said. For a new beginning. For a different kind of life. He led her to a small, secluded alcove, hidden amongst the trees. A stone bench overlooked a breathtaking vista of the sea, the waves crashing against the rocks below. The air was filled with the scent of salt and pine, the sound of the waves a soothing rhythm. This was my mother's favorite place, Matteo said, his voice quiet, reflective. She used to come here to read, to paint, to escape the pressures of our world. She found peace here. Bianca sat on the bench, her gaze sweeping across the stunning view. She could understand why his mother had loved this place. It was a sanctuary, a refuge from the chaos and the violence that permeated their lives. She died when I was young, Matteo continued, sitting beside her. She was fragile. She couldn't handle the harsh realities of our world. Bianca sensed a deep sense of loss in his voice, a vulnerability that he rarely allowed to surface. She felt a pang of empathy for him, a recognition of the shared pain of losing a mother too soon. I am sorry, she said, her voice sincere. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It was a long time ago, he said, but the scars remain. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves. Bianca felt a strange sense of connection to him, a shared understanding that transcended their circumstances. They were both survivors, both scarred by the past, both struggling to find their place in a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. I used to dream of a different life, Bianca said, her voice barely a whisper. A life away from all of this. A life of peace. Matteo turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a surprising tenderness. Perhaps, he said, his voice soft, that dream is not entirely lost. He looked like he wanted to say more, and Bianca wished he would. But he simply looked at her, in that measuring way. He was always planning. Always one step ahead. What was he planning for her? This question lingered as they made their way back to the villa. Chapter 5. A Gilded Cage of Secrets. Days turned into weeks, and Bianca settled into a routine at the villa. It was a life of luxurious confinement, a gilded cage where she was treated with a strange mixture of courtesy and control. Matteo continued her education, introducing her to various aspects of his business empire, from legitimate enterprises like shipping and real estate to the more shadowy operations that lay beneath the surface. He took her to board meetings, where she sat silently, observing the dynamics of power and influence, the subtle negotiations and veiled threats that characterized their world. He showed her the accounting ledgers, explaining the intricate flow of money, the complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts that concealed their true wealth. He even took her to a discreet meeting with some of his capos, the lieutenants who controlled various aspects of his criminal operations. These were hardened men, scarred and ruthless, their loyalty to Matteo absolute. They treated Bianca with a wary respect, acknowledging her position as Matteo's consort, but also making it clear that she was an outsider, someone who had not earned her place in their world. Bianca learned to navigate these encounters with a careful diplomacy, maintaining a facade of composure while silently assessing the men, their strengths, their weaknesses, their potential for loyalty or betrayal. She was a quick study, absorbing the nuances of their world, learning the unspoken rules, the codes of conduct, the subtle signals that could mean the difference between life and death. But it was the evenings, spent alone with Matteo, that were the most revealing and the most unsettling. He would often talk about his vision for the future, his plans to expand his empire, to consolidate his power, to create a lasting legacy. He spoke with a passion and a conviction that was both impressive and frightening. He also began to share more personal details about his life, his childhood, his dreams, his regrets. He told her about his love for music, his passion for art, his fascination with history. He revealed a side of himself that was surprisingly sensitive, cultured, and vulnerable. One evening, as they were having dinner on the terrace, he played a recording of a classical piece, a haunting melody that filled the air with a sense of melancholy beauty. "My mother used to play this," he said, his voice soft. "She was a talented pianist. She taught me to appreciate music, to find solace in its beauty." Bianca listened to the music, her heart aching with a strange mixture of sadness and longing. She had never had the opportunity to pursue her own artistic interests. Her life had been too consumed by duty, by responsibility, by the demands of her family. "I used to paint," she said, surprising herself with the admission. "When I was younger," before she trailed off, unsure of how to explain the abrupt end to her artistic pursuits. Matteo looked at her, his eyes curious. "Before what?" he asked. "Before my father decided it was inappropriate," Bianca said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "He believed a woman's place was in the home, not in an art studio." Matteo frowned. "A narrow-minded view," he said. "Art is a powerful force. It can inspire, it can challenge, it can reveal truths that are hidden beneath the surface." He paused, his gaze fixed on her face. "Perhaps you should paint again," he said. "I would be interested to see your work." The suggestion surprised her. She had not picked up a paintbrush in decades. The thought of doing so again filled her with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I don't know," she said, her voice hesitant. "It has been a long time." He smiled, a slow, encouraging smile. "It is never too late to rediscover a passion," he said. "I will have supplies brought to your room. You can paint whenever you like. No pressure." The gesture, small as it was, touched her. It was a sign of respect, of recognition of her as an individual, not just as a pawn in his game. It was also a challenge, an invitation to explore a part of herself that she had long suppressed. Later that night, as she lay in bed, unable to sleep, Bianca found herself thinking about Matteo's offer. She got up and walked to the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The moon was full, casting a silvery glow over the sea. She looked out at the vast expanse of water, her mind filled with conflicting emotions. She was still a prisoner in a sense, but within the confines of her gilded cage, she was beginning to discover a sense of freedom, a possibility of self-expression that she had never known before. Matteo was a dangerous man, a man who controlled her life, a man who had taken everything from her family. But he was also a complex, intriguing man, a man who saw something in her that no one else had ever seen. She found the beginnings of a hidden room, as well, in the back of her grand closet. Opening it, the room was filled with old art and various tarps and coverings. It had been used a long time ago. But by whom? She pulled back one of the sheets to discover a partially finished portrait. It was of a young Matteo, much younger. He looked happier in the painting. The art was good, realistic. And, Bianca realized, this must have been his mother's studio. She was about to leave the room when a glint of metal caught her eye. She walked closer. It was a small, ornate box. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a key. She had no idea what it opened or what it meant, but she knew that it was important. Closing the box, she pocketed the key. She knew that Matteo wouldn't show all of his cards. He was hiding something, and she had a feeling this key would lead to something. She was not sure what yet. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Midnight Hour. The discovery of the hidden art studio and the mysterious key stirred something within Bianca. It was a tangible link to Matteo's past, to the mother he had loved and lost. It was also a reminder that there were secrets within the walls of the villa, hidden depths to the man who held her captive. She began to explore the villa more thoroughly, searching for clues, for any hint of what the key might unlock. She spent hours in the library, poring over old books, family records, anything that might shed light on Matteo's history, his family's secrets. She discovered that the villa had been built by Matteo's grandfather, a man who had amassed a fortune through a combination of shrewd business dealings and ruthless ambition. She also learned more about Matteo's mother, Isabella, a woman of renowned beauty and artistic talent, who had died under mysterious circumstances when Matteo was still a child. The official story was that Isabella had suffered from a debilitating illness, a condition that had gradually eroded her health and sanity. But Bianca found hints, whispers in old letters and diaries, that suggested a different narrative. There were rumors of a troubled marriage, of infidelities, of a desperate woman trapped in a world she could not escape. One afternoon, while browsing through a collection of old photographs, Bianca found a picture of Isabella taken shortly before her death. She was standing in the garden, near the alcove where Matteo had told Bianca it was her favorite spot. She looked pale and fragile, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. But there was something else in her expression, a hint of defiance, of a hidden strength that belied her frail appearance. Bianca felt a surge of empathy for Isabella, a recognition of the shared experience of being a woman trapped in a man's world, of having to suppress one's own desires and dreams in order to survive. She wondered if Isabella had found solace in her art, if she had used her paintings as a way to express the emotions she could not voice, the secrets she could not reveal. She returned to the hidden studio, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. She examined the unfinished portrait of young Matteo, marveling at the skill and the sensitivity of the artist. She looked at the other paintings, covered in dust sheets, and felt a strong urge to uncover them, to see the world through Isabella's eyes. She began to spend hours in the studio, carefully cleaning and restoring the paintings. She discovered landscapes, portraits, still lives, all imbued with a sense of melancholy beauty, a reflection of Isabella's inner world. She also found a series of sketches hidden in a drawer that depicted scenes from Isabella's life, her childhood home, her wedding day, her first meeting with Matteo's father. One sketch, in particular, caught Bianca's attention. It showed a young Isabella standing in front of a large, ornate door, a door that looked strikingly familiar. Bianca realized, with a jolt of recognition, that it was the door to the villa's main library. But there was something different about the door in the sketch. There was a small, almost imperceptible detail that was missing from the actual door, a carved inscription above the lintel. Bianca rushed to the library, her heart pounding with anticipation. She examined the door carefully, running her fingers over the smooth, polished wood. She found nothing, but she remembered the key, the small, ornate key she had found in the hidden box. She retrieved it from her pocket, her hand trembling. She looked around, making sure she was alone. The villa was quiet, the staff discreet and unobtrusive. She inserted the key into the lock and turned. It fit perfectly, but the door didn't open. She turned the key, but still it was just a regular, locked door. Frowning, she continued to examine the doorframe. The sketch. What was she missing? She ran her hands across the frame, inch by inch. And that's when she felt it. An indent. Almost invisible, but just enough. She felt around the indent and pushed. A hidden mechanism clicked, and a small panel in the door slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, Bianca found a small, leather-bound diary. It was Isabella's diary. Bianca's heart raced as she carefully opened the fragile book. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded, but the handwriting was clear and legible. She began to read, her eyes scanning the words, her mind absorbing the secrets that Isabella had confided to the pages so many years ago. The diary revealed a story of love and betrayal, of passion and despair, of a woman trapped in a gilded cage, yearning for freedom. Isabella had fallen deeply in love with Matteo's father, Alessandro, a different Alessandro than Bianca's father, a man who had initially seemed charming and attentive, but who had gradually revealed a darker, more controlling side. She had endured his infidelities, his emotional abuse, his constant surveillance. She had found solace in her art, in her secret rendezvous with a lover, a man who had offered her a glimpse of a different kind of life. As Bianca read further, she learned the horrifying truth. The lover was Bianca's father. He had been young and reckless, and he had promised the world to Isabella. Bianca felt a wave of nausea, a sickening realization of the tangled web of relationships and betrayals that had shaped her life. Her father, Matteo, and herself, all caught in the crosshairs. She continued to read, desperate to understand. Isabella had planned to escape with her lover, to leave her husband and her suffocating world behind. But her plans had been discovered. Alessandro had confronted her, and in a fit of rage, had the diary ended abruptly, the last few pages torn out. Bianca stared at the ripped edges, her mind reeling. She didn't know exactly what had happened, but she could guess. Alessandro had killed Isabella, silencing her forever, burying her secrets along with her body. Bianca closed the diary, her hands shaking. She felt a profound sense of sadness, of outrage, of connection to the woman who had written these words so many years ago. She had found the truth, or at least a part of it. But the truth was a dangerous thing, a weapon that could be used to destroy as well as to liberate. She knew she had to tell Matteo. But a voice stopped her. What would he do with this information? Use it to destroy her? Or would he finally understand? The weight of generations of secrets rested on her shoulders. She looked out into the night, the whispers of the past swirling around her. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Coiled Embrace. The knowledge Bianca now possessed felt like a serpent, coiled tightly around her heart, its venomous secrets threatening to poison her from within. She carried Isabella's diary with her constantly, hidden beneath her clothes, its presence a constant reminder of the tangled web of betrayal and deceit that connected their families. She tried to act normal, to maintain the facade of composure that she had carefully cultivated. But Matteo was perceptive, too perceptive. He sensed a change in her, a subtle shift in her demeanor. "You are quiet tonight," he said, one evening as they were having dinner on the terrace. "Is something troubling you?" Bianca hesitated, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't reveal the full truth, not yet. It was too dangerous, too explosive. But she couldn't lie to him, either. He would see through her deception. "I have been thinking," she said, choosing her words carefully, "about your mother, about her life here." Matteo's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his face. "My mother is not a subject I enjoy discussing," he said, his voice curt. "I understand," Bianca said. "But I have been learning things. About the villa, about its history." He looked at her, his eyes narrowed, suspicious. "What have you been learning?" he asked. Bianca took a deep breath. "I found an old art studio," she said, "hidden in the back of my closet. I believe it belonged to your mother." Matteo's body stiffened, his gaze fixed on her face. "You have been exploring," he said, his voice low and dangerous. It was not a question. "I was curious," Bianca said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I wanted to understand the woman who lived here before me." He rose from his chair and walked to the edge of the terrace, his back to her. "My mother was a fragile woman," he said, his voice tight. "She was not suited to this world." "I don't believe that is entirely true," Bianca said, her voice gaining strength. "I believe she was unhappy. Trapped." Matteo turned back to face her, his eyes blazing with anger. "You know nothing about my mother," he said, his voice harsh. "You are overstepping." Bianca stood her ground, meeting his gaze. "I know that she was an artist," she said. "A talented artist. And I know that she found solace in her art, a way to express the emotions she could not voice." She reached into her dress and pulled out the small, ornate box she had found in the studio, the box that contained the key. She held it out to him. "I found this," she said, "in the studio. It belonged to your mother." Matteo stared at the box, his expression unreadable. He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, a reminder of the dangerous attraction that still simmered between them. He opened the box, his eyes fixed on the key inside. He recognized it. She could see it in his face. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice low. "It was hidden," Bianca said. "In a secret compartment. Behind a painting." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "You have been resourceful," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I have been trying to understand," Bianca said. "To understand you, your family, your history." He closed the box, his hand tightening around it. Some things are best left buried, Bianca, he said. Some secrets are too dangerous to uncover. But secrets have a way of coming to light, Bianca said, her voice soft. They fester, they poison, they destroy. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, pain, and something else. Something that looked like fear. What do you want, Bianca? He asked, his voice barely a whisper.
I want the truth, she said.
I want to understand what happened to your mother. I want to know why he did what he did. Matteo turned away from her, his gaze fixed on the dark sea. The truth is a dangerous thing, Bianca, he said. It can shatter illusions, destroy relationships, unleash chaos. But it can also liberate, Bianca said. It can heal. It can bring peace. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the crashing of the waves against the rocks below. Then, he turned back to face her, his expression resolute. Very well, he said. You want the truth? I will show you the truth. He took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. He led her inside the villa, through the darkened corridors, to the library. He stopped before the large, ornate door, the door that Bianca had seen in Isabella's sketch. This, he said, his voice low, is where it all began. And this is where it will end. Bianca looked into his eyes and saw the resolve and pain written there. Whatever he was about to show her, it would change everything. Chapter 8. Scars Beneath the Surface. Matteo, without a word, reached into his pocket, pulling out his own key. It was nearly identical to the one Bianca had found, except it had a small, almost unnoticeable marking on it. A serpent. Bianca had known, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was aware of the hidden compartment, the diary. He had been waiting, testing her. He inserted the key and, like Bianca, felt for the hidden mechanism. The panel slid open. He reached inside, but he didn't pull out a diary. He pulled out a small silver pistol. Bianca gasped, taking a step back. Matteo looked at the gun in his hand, his expression grim. This, he said, his voice low, was my mother's. She used it to defend herself. Defend herself? Bianca asked, her voice trembling. From whom? Matteo's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a deep, searing pain. From my father, he said. Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected, from the diary, that Alessandro Greco had been responsible for Isabella's death. But to hear Matteo confirm it, to see the evidence in his hand, was a different kind of horror. He killed her? Bianca asked, her voice barely a whisper. Matteo nodded, his jaw tight.
He claimed it was an accident, he said.
That she had been cleaning the gun, and it had gone off. But I knew it was a lie. He closed his eyes for a moment, his hand tightening around the pistol. I was 10 years old, he said. I was in my room playing. I heard the shot. I ran to the library. I saw her lying on the floor, blood everywhere. His voice broke, his composure cracking. Bianca reached out and touched his arm, her heart aching for the young boy he had been, the trauma he had endured. I am so sorry, she said, her voice filled with compassion. He opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. He covered it up, he said, his voice filled with a bitter rage. He used his power, his influence, to silence everyone. The police, the doctors, the servants, they all knew. But they were too afraid to speak the truth. And your grandfather? Bianca asked. Did he know? Matteo nodded. He knew, he said. But he did nothing. He protected his son, his heir. He valued the family name, the family power, above everything else. Bianca felt a surge of anger, a disgust for the men who had perpetuated this cycle of violence and deceit. And that's why you took everything from my father, she said, her voice filled with understanding. It was revenge. Matteo looked at her, his eyes searching hers. It was justice, he said. Your father was involved. He was my mother's lover. He was part of the reason she died. Bianca felt a wave of guilt, a shame for her father's actions. She had known he was a flawed man, a man capable of cruelty and betrayal. But she had never imagined the depth of his depravity. He promised to take her away, she said. From your father. He offered her a chance at another life. And then he betrayed her, Matteo responded, coolly. My father found out. He showed your father proof that my mother was unstable, that she was delusional. He planted doubts. And your father believed him. He backed out at the very end. Bianca was floored. So my father thought that she was crazy? Yes. And he was too cowardly to stand up to my father. Matteo took a deep breath. I found this hidden. Years later, I put the pieces together. He gestured to the gun. This has always been my reminder of what they did. But why keep it a secret? Bianca asked. Why not expose the truth? Matteo smiled, a bitter, cynical smile. The truth is a messy thing, Bianca, he said. It rarely brings justice. It often creates more chaos, more pain. And in our world, power is more important than truth. He put the pistol back in the compartment, closing the panel. He turned to face her, his expression softening. I did not tell you this to hurt you, Bianca, he said. I told you because you deserve to know. And because I trust you. The word surprised her. Trust. From a man who had built his empire on secrecy and control. It was a fragile, precious thing, a gift he was offering her. Thank you, she said, her voice sincere, for sharing this with me. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. You're different, Bianca, he said. You are not like the others. You have a strength and integrity that I admire. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. I have kept you here, a prisoner, in a sense, he whispered. But perhaps we can find a different way. A way to rewrite the story. He pulled back, his eyes locking with hers. The scars of his past were visible, etched on his face, in his eyes. But there was also something else there, a glimmer of hope, a flicker of vulnerability, a desire for something more. Bianca realized that he had just shared the biggest secret of his life. It was a turning point, and what they did now would determine everything. Chapter 9. A dance of defiance and desire. The revelation of Matteo's past and his unexpected confession of trust created a shift in their dynamic. The lines between captor and captive, enemy and confidant, began to blur. Bianca found herself drawn to him, not just by a physical attraction, but by a deeper emotional connection, a shared understanding of loss and resilience. Matteo, in turn, began to treat her less like a prisoner and more like a partner. He involved her more deeply in his business dealings, seeking her advice, valuing her insights. He shared his plans, his ambitions, his fears with her, revealing a vulnerability that he had kept hidden from everyone else. He also encouraged her to return to her art, providing her with a fully equipped studio in a sun-drenched room overlooking the sea. Bianca hesitated at first, unsure of whether she could recapture the passion she had once felt for painting. But with Matteo's gentle encouragement, she picked up a brush and began to explore the canvas, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. She found that the act of painting, of expressing her emotions through color and form, was a cathartic release, a way to process the turmoil and the uncertainty of her new life. She painted the sea, the sky, the gardens, the villa, capturing the beauty and the darkness of her surroundings. She also painted portraits of Matteo, capturing his strength, his vulnerability, his hidden depths. One evening, Matteo found her in the studio, working on a portrait of him. He stood silently for a moment, watching her, his expression unreadable. You're capturing something more, he said, his voice soft. Something beyond the surface. Bianca looked at the painting, her heart beating faster. She had been trying to capture not just his physical likeness, but the essence of the man she had come to know, the man who had revealed his scars, his vulnerabilities, his hopes. I am trying to understand you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. He reached out and gently touched the canvas, his fingers tracing the lines of his painted face. And what have you learned? He asked, his eyes locking with hers. Bianca hesitated, her mind racing. She had learned that he was a complex, contradictory man, capable of both ruthlessness and tenderness, of cruelty and compassion. She had learned that he was driven by a deep-seated need for justice, for redemption, for a way to escape the shadows of his past. "I have learned that you are more than you seem," she said, her voice trembling. "That you're human." He smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile. "And is that a good thing or a bad thing?" he asked. "I don't know," Bianca said, her voice honest. "It is complicated." He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "Life is complicated, Bianca," he whispered. "Especially our life. But it can also be beautiful, if we allow it." He pulled back, his eyes holding hers. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a mixture of desire and defiance, of fear and fascination. Bianca felt a pull towards him, a magnetic force that she could not resist. She had spent her life suppressing her desires, her passions, her needs. She had played the role of the dutiful daughter, the obedient wife, the stoic matriarch. She had never allowed herself to feel, to truly live. But now, in this strange, unsettling world, she was being offered a chance to break free, to embrace a different kind of life, a different kind of love. "I have been thinking," Matteo said, his voice breaking the silence. "About your father, about the debt he owed me." Bianca stiffened, her body tensing. She had been trying to forget about her father, about the role he had played in this tangled web of deceit and betrayal. "What about him?" she asked, her voice wary. "I have decided to forgive him," Matteo said, his voice firm. Bianca stared at him, surprised. "Forgive him?" she repeated.
"But why?"
He shrugged, a slight smile playing on his lips.
"Because it is time to move on," he said.
"To let go of the past. To build a new future." He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "I have taken everything from your family, Bianca," he said. "But I do not want to take you. Not in that way." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I want you to stay here, Bianca," he said. "Not as my prisoner, not as my collateral, but as my partner, my equal, my love." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. He was offering her a choice, a chance to redefine their relationship, to build something new, something based on trust, on respect, on love. But could she truly forgive him for what he had done? Could she trust him after everything that had happened? She looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity there, the genuine desire for a different kind of future. She saw the scars of his past, but she also saw the hope, the vulnerability, the love that he was offering her. It was a risk, a dangerous gamble. She started, but couldn't find the words. She wanted to trust him. God, she wanted to trust him. But was it too much? Matteo, sensing her hesitation, stepped closer. He cupped her face.
"I know it is a lot to ask," he said.
"But I am asking. Stay with me." Bianca looked into his eyes. "I will stay," she said, the words a whisper, but filled with a newfound conviction. "But on my terms." A slow smile spread across Matteo's face. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a promise of a future yet to be written. The serpent had loosened its coils, replaced by a tentative, fragile hope. Chapter 10. The price of a stolen moment. The kiss, that first, hesitant surrender to the undeniable pull between them, marked a turning point. Bianca and Matteo entered a new phase of their relationship, a delicate dance between two strong-willed individuals, each carrying the weight of their past, each tentatively reaching for a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. They spent their days exploring the nuances of their newfound connection. They walked in the gardens, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. They talked for hours, delving into the complexities of their world, their families, their own internal struggles. They rediscovered the simple joys of companionship, of shared laughter, of quiet moments of intimacy. Bianca continued to paint, her art reflecting the transformation she was undergoing, the blossoming of a love that had sprung from the ashes of betrayal and vengeance. Matteo, in turn, opened up to her even more, sharing his vulnerabilities, his regrets, his hopes for a future free from the shadows of his past. He began to involve her more directly in his business dealings, seeking her counsel, valuing her strategic mind. Bianca, using her own experience and understanding of the intricate dynamics of their world, proved to be a valuable asset, offering insights that surprised and impressed even Matteo's most trusted advisors. But their newfound happiness was fragile, a stolen moment in a world that was constantly threatening to intrude. There were whispers of discontent among some of Matteo's capos, whispers of resentment towards Bianca, the outsider, the woman who had seemingly captured their Don's heart and attention. There were also rumblings from rival families, sensing an opportunity to exploit the perceived weakness in the Greco Empire, the perceived distraction of their leader. One evening, as Bianca and Matteo were having dinner on the terrace, Lorenzo, Matteo's most trusted lieutenant, arrived with urgent news. "Don Matteo," he said, his voice grave, "there has been an incident. A shipment of ours was intercepted. Several of our men were killed." Matteo's face hardened, his eyes turning cold. "Who?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Lorenzo hesitated, his gaze flickering towards Bianca. "We believe it was the Salernos," he said. "They have been making moves, testing our defenses." The Salernos, another rival family, known for their brutality and their ambition. Bianca knew the name, knew the threat they posed. "They are challenging you," Bianca said, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. "They see us as a weakness." Matteo nodded, his jaw tight. "They are mistaken," he said. "They will pay for this." He turned to Lorenzo, his voice filled with a cold fury. "Gather the men," he said. "We will respond." Swiftly and decisively. Lorenzo bowed his head. "As you command, Don Matteo," he said, and left. Bianca looked at Matteo, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and something else. A strange sense of excitement, of exhilaration. She had spent her life avoiding conflict, suppressing her own strength, playing the role of the demure, obedient woman. But now, she felt a surge of defiance, a desire to stand by Matteo's side, to fight alongside him. "Be careful," she said, her voice soft but firm. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "I always am," he said. "But this time it is different. This time I have something to fight for." He reached out and took her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. "Stay here," he said. "Stay safe. I will return." He kissed her, a fierce, possessive kiss that left her breathless. Then, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, his figure silhouetted against the flickering lights of the villa. Bianca watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the risks, the dangers that lay ahead. She knew that this world, their world, was a brutal, unforgiving place, where love and loyalty could be as deadly as betrayal and vengeance. But she also knew that she could not go back, that she could not return to the life she had known before. She had tasted freedom, she had found love, she had discovered a strength within herself that she had never known existed. She would wait for him. She would pray for his safety. And she would be ready to face whatever the future held, together. She had made her choice. She had chosen love, in a world of darkness. She looked up into the sky. It was a moonless night, and the stars were bright. She hoped it was a good omen. Chapter 11. Betrayal's Bitter Sting. Matteo's absence stretched from hours into days, the silence of the villa punctuated only by the hushed whispers of the staff and the constant, gnawing anxiety in Bianca's heart. She tried to occupy herself, painting, reading, exploring the grounds, but her mind kept returning to Matteo, to the dangers he faced, to the uncertain future that awaited them. Lorenzo, ever the loyal lieutenant, provided her with brief, guarded updates. The conflict with the Salernos was escalating, a series of retaliatory strikes and counterstrikes that threatened to plunge their world into all-out war. Matteo, he assured her, was safe, in control, but the situation was volatile. Bianca trusted Lorenzo, to a point. She knew he was loyal to Matteo, but she also sensed a certain reserve in his demeanor, a subtle disapproval of her presence, her influence over his Don. She was an outsider, after all, a woman who had not earned her place in their world, a woman who had, in the eyes of some, weakened their leader. One afternoon, as she was walking in the gardens, she encountered Giovanni, Lorenzo's second-in-command, the other man who had escorted her to the villa on that fateful first day. He was usually taciturn, almost invisible, but today he seemed agitated, his eyes darting nervously around. "Signora," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need to speak with you. In private." Bianca's heart quickened. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her gut. "What is it, Giovanni?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He looked around, making sure they were not observed.
"It's Lorenzo," he said.
"I don't trust him."
Bianca frowned.
"What do you mean?"
she asked.
"He's been acting strangely," Giovanni said. "Meeting with people he shouldn't be meeting with. Making calls, I think he's planning something." "Planning what?" Bianca asked, her voice barely a whisper. Giovanni hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. "I think he's planning to betray Don Matteo," he said. "I think he's working with the Salernos." Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. Betrayal. It was the constant thread in their world, the serpent that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. But Lorenzo? Matteo's most trusted lieutenant? It seemed impossible.
"Why?"
she asked. "Why would he do that?" "Power," Giovanni said simply.
"Greed."
"Ambition. He wants what Don Matteo has. He's tired of being second in command." Bianca's mind raced. She had sensed a certain tension between Matteo and Lorenzo, a subtle undercurrent of rivalry. But she had never imagined it would lead to this, to outright betrayal. "We need to warn Matteo," she said, her voice urgent. Giovanni shook his head.
"We can't," he said.
"Lorenzo controls all communications. He'll intercept any message we try to send. He'll know we're onto him." "Then what do we do?" Bianca asked, her voice filled with desperation. Giovanni looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and determination. "We have to stop him ourselves," he said, "before it's too late." He explained his plan, a risky, desperate gamble that could either save Matteo's life or lead to their own destruction. Bianca listened intently, her mind assessing the risks, the potential consequences. It was a dangerous game, but she knew she had no choice. She had to do something. She couldn't stand idly by while Matteo was betrayed, possibly killed. As Giovanni laid out the details, Bianca realized the scope of the betrayal. It wasn't just Lorenzo. There were others involved, capos within Matteo's own organization, men who had secretly pledged their allegiance to the Salernos, lured by promises of power and wealth. They planned to ambush him, Giovanni said, his voice low and grim. "Tonight, when he returns from a meeting with the neutral party." A meeting arranged by Lorenzo. Bianca's blood ran cold. It was a trap, a carefully orchestrated plot to eliminate Matteo and seize control of his empire. And she, unwittingly, had played a part in it. Her presence, her relationship with Matteo, had been used as a weapon, a distraction, a way to weaken him. "We have to go," Bianca said, her voice firm, resolute. "We have to warn him." Giovanni nodded. "I have a car," he said. "Hidden. We can leave without anyone knowing." He looked at her. "Are you sure about this, Signora?" Bianca met his gaze, her eyes filled with a steely determination. "I am sure," she said. She would not let Matteo be betrayed. She would not let him be killed. She would fight for him, even if it meant risking her own life. She was a Vitali and a Greco now, too. She wouldn't stand idly by. As they prepared to leave, Bianca felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was stepping into the darkness, into the heart of the storm. But she was not alone. She had Giovanni, a loyal soldier, by her side. And she had her own strength, her own intelligence, her own unwavering love for Matteo. It was more than just a betrayal of Matteo. It was a betrayal of her. Chapter 12. Shattered Reflections of Trust. The drive to the meeting point was a blur of darkened streets and racing thoughts. Bianca, seated beside Giovanni, gripped the dashboard, her mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. Every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat, every passing car a possible enemy. Giovanni, his face grim and set, navigated the treacherous roads with a practiced skill, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. He had chosen a circuitous route, avoiding the main thoroughfares, hoping to evade any surveillance that Lorenzo might have put in place. "We're almost there," he said, his voice low and tense.
"Stay close to me."
"And be ready for anything." Bianca nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been involved in anything like this before, never faced such a direct, immediate threat. Her life had been one of privilege and protection, shielded from the brutal realities of her family's world. But now, she was in the thick of it, a pawn in a deadly game, a woman fighting for the man she loved. They arrived at the meeting point, a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place where illicit deals were often struck, where secrets were traded, and where lives were sometimes lost. The area was deserted, shrouded in darkness, the only sound the distant hum of traffic and the lapping of waves against the nearby docks. "He's not here yet," Giovanni said, his eyes scanning the empty warehouse. "We're early." They waited, concealed in the shadows, their senses on high alert. The tension was palpable, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old building and the pounding of their own hearts. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance, approaching slowly. Giovanni tensed, his hand reaching for the gun hidden beneath his jacket.
"That's him," he said.
"Get ready." The car, a sleek black sedan, pulled up to the warehouse, its headlights illuminating the empty space. Matteo emerged from the driver's side, his figure silhouetted against the bright lights. He looked around, his eyes searching the darkness. Before Bianca could react, before Giovanni could warn him, another car screeched to a halt beside Matteo's, blocking his escape. Several men jumped out, their faces masked, their weapons drawn. "It's a trap," Bianca screamed, her voice echoing in the night. Matteo, alerted by her warning, reacted instantly. He dove for cover behind his car, just as a hail of bullets erupted, shattering the windows, ripping through the metal. Giovanni, swearing under his breath, returned fire, his shots echoing in the confined space. Bianca, her heart pounding in her chest, ducked down, seeking shelter behind the dashboard. The scene was a chaotic blur of gunfire, shouting, and the screeching of tires. Bianca, her senses overwhelmed, could only pray that Matteo was still alive, that Giovanni could hold off the attackers long enough for them to escape.
But then she saw him.
Lorenzo, standing at the edge of the warehouse, a smirk on his face, watching the scene unfold with a cold, detached amusement. He was holding a pistol, but he wasn't firing. He was simply observing. Bianca's blood ran cold. She realized, with a sickening certainty, that Lorenzo was not just a betrayer, he was the mastermind, the architect of this deadly trap. He had orchestrated everything, manipulated everyone, all for the sake of power, of greed, of ambition. And he was winning. Matteo was pinned down, outnumbered, outgunned. Giovanni was fighting bravely, but he was just one man against many. It was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed, before Matteo was killed. Bianca knew she had to do something, anything, to help. She couldn't just sit there, cowering in fear, waiting for the inevitable. She had to act, to fight, to save the man she loved. She looked around, desperately searching for a weapon, for anything she could use. Her eyes fell on a discarded metal pipe, lying on the ground near the car. It was a crude weapon, but it was better than nothing. She grabbed the pipe, her hands trembling, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and rage. She would not let Lorenzo win. She would not let him kill Matteo. She would fight, even if it meant facing her own death. Taking a deep breath, she steeled her nerves. She opened the door quietly and made her way to where Lorenzo was standing. He did not see her approach. He was too busy savoring his victory. She raised the pipe above her head and brought it crashing down. Lorenzo groaned and fell to the ground. Bianca stood over him, panting, unsure if he was dead or alive. But she knew this would change the tide of the fight. The attackers had lost their leader. Chapter 13. The Unseen Threads of Fate. Lorenzo's collapse created a momentary lull in the firefight. The attackers, momentarily disoriented by the sudden incapacitation of their leader, hesitated, their barrage of gunfire faltering. It was the opening Matteo and Giovanni needed. Matteo, seizing the opportunity, emerged from behind his car, his own weapon blazing. He moved with a lethal grace, years of training and experience honed into a deadly efficiency. Giovanni, emboldened by Bianca's courageous act, pressed his attack, forcing the remaining assailants to retreat. The scene was a whirlwind of movement and noise, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. Bianca, still clutching the metal pipe, watched in a mixture of terror and awe as Matteo and Giovanni, working in perfect coordination, routed the attackers. The remaining men, realizing they had lost the element of surprise and their leader, scrambled back into their car and sped away, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a scene of chaos and destruction. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged breathing of the combatants and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Matteo, his face grim and streaked with gunpowder, rushed to Bianca, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse, his hands gently checking her for injuries. Bianca nodded, her body trembling from the adrenaline rush. "I think so," she said, her voice shaky. He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close, his heart pounding against hers. "You saved my life," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You were incredible." Bianca leaned into his embrace, her body relaxing against his, the fear and tension slowly ebbing away. She had faced death, had fought for the man she loved, and had emerged victorious. Giovanni, his face bruised and bleeding, approached them, a grim smile on his lips.
"They're gone," he said. "For now."
"But they'll be back." Matteo nodded, his gaze hardening. "They will pay for this," he said, his voice filled with a cold fury. "Every single one of them." He looked at Lorenzo, lying unconscious on the ground, his face pale and contorted.
"Take him," he said to Giovanni.
"And make him talk.
I want to know who else was involved."
I want to know everything." Giovanni nodded, his eyes gleaming with a vengeful satisfaction. He hauled Lorenzo to his feet, roughly binding his hands with a length of rope. As the sirens grew closer, Matteo turned back to Bianca, his expression softening.
"We need to leave," he said.
"Before the police arrive." He led her to his car, the one that had been riddled with bullets, its windows shattered, its body scarred. It was a miracle that he had survived the initial ambush. They drove away from the warehouse, leaving behind the scene of the battle, the echoes of the gunfire, the shattered remnants of trust and loyalty. As they drove, Bianca leaned her head against Matteo's shoulder, her body exhausted, her mind reeling from the events of the night. "Lorenzo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I can't believe he betrayed you." Matteo sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I trusted him," he said. "I considered him a brother. But in our world, trust is a luxury we cannot afford." "But Giovanni," Bianca said. "He was loyal. He risked his life for you." Matteo nodded. "Giovanni is a good man," he said. "A rare thing in our world. I owe him everything." They drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio, which Giovanni had discreetly disabled. "What will happen now?" Bianca asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Matteo looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and something else. Something that looked like hope. "We will rebuild," he said. "We will strengthen our defenses. We will eliminate our enemies. And we will create a new future. Together." He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "You changed everything tonight, Bianca," he said. "You showed me that love is not a weakness. It is a strength. It is the greatest weapon we have." His words, spoken with such conviction, filled her with a sense of warmth, of belonging, of purpose. She had found her place in this world, not as a pawn, not as a prisoner, but as a partner, a warrior, a woman who had chosen love in the face of darkness. And as they drove further, away from danger, Bianca felt a new chapter unfolding. One with new uncertainty, but now, with a united front. Chapter 14. Reckoning in the Rain. The aftermath of the betrayal was a whirlwind of activity. Matteo, with Bianca by his side, launched a ruthless campaign to purge his organization of any remaining traces of disloyalty. Informants were interrogated, alliances were re-evaluated, and a new, tighter circle of trust was formed around Matteo. Giovanni, elevated to the position of Matteo's right-hand man, proved to be an invaluable asset, his loyalty unwavering, his competence unquestioned. He oversaw the interrogation of Lorenzo, extracting the names of the other conspirators, uncovering the full extent of the plot against Matteo. Lorenzo, stripped of his power and prestige, his face a mask of fear and regret, revealed everything. He had been seduced by the Salerno's promises of wealth and control, blinded by his own ambition, his own resentment towards Matteo. He had underestimated Bianca, dismissed her as a mere distraction, a pawn in his game. He had paid the price for his misjudgment. The reckoning was swift and brutal. The conspirators, exposed and isolated, were dealt with according to the harsh code of their world. Some were exiled, stripped of their assets and banished from the city. Others disappeared. The message was clear. Loyalty to Matteo Greco was absolute. Betrayal was punishable by death. Bianca, although hardened by her experiences, found herself struggling with the ruthlessness of Matteo's actions. She understood the necessity of maintaining control, of eliminating threats, but the cold-blooded efficiency with which it was carried out left her shaken. One evening, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil in her soul, she confronted Matteo. They were in his study, the room dimly lit, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the relentless drumming of the rain against the windows. Is this what it means to be with you?" she asked, her voice trembling. To live in a world of constant violence, of constant fear, of constant death. Matteo looked at her, his face etched with weariness, his eyes filled with a deep-seated sadness. "It is the world we live in, Bianca," he said. "A world we inherited. A world we are trying to navigate. But is there no other way?" Bianca asked, her voice pleading. "Can we not find a different path? A path of peace?" Matteo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Peace is a fragile thing, Bianca," he said. "Easily shattered. Especially in our world. We must be strong. We must be vigilant. We must be ruthless. Or we will be destroyed. But at what cost?" Bianca asked. "What about our souls? What about our humanity?" Matteo walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the raging storm outside. "We do what we must, Bianca," he said. "To survive. To protect what we have. To protect the ones we love." He turned back to face her, his expression softening. "I know it is difficult for you," he said. "You were not raised in this world. You were not prepared for this. But I am here now," Bianca said, her voice firm. "And I am adapting. But I will not lose myself. I will not become like them." Matteo reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. "You are not like them, Bianca," he said. "You are different. You are good. And that is why I love you." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that spoke of a deep, abiding love, a love that had survived betrayal, violence, and the constant threat of destruction. The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood, the fear, the remnants of the past. Bianca clung to Matteo, finding solace in his embrace, drawing strength from his love. She knew the storm was not over, that there would be more challenges, more dangers, more difficult choices ahead. But she also knew that she was not alone. She had Matteo by her side, a man who had been hardened by the world, yes, but who also possessed a capacity for love, for compassion, for redemption. As they held each other, the storm outside began to subside, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moon, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. The reckoning had been brutal, the price had been high, but perhaps, just perhaps, They could find a way to build a new future, a future where love and loyalty could triumph over betrayal and violence. Bianca closed her eyes, and the rain sounded softer. She focused on the warmth of Matteo beside her. The reckoning may have been over, but the real battle was just beginning. Chapter 15. A Pact Forged in Darkness. The relative calm that followed the storm of betrayal was deceptive. While Matteo focused on consolidating his power and rebuilding trust within his organization, a new threat was brewing, one that came not from a rival family, but from within the very fabric of their society, the law. A special task force, led by a determined and incorruptible investigator named Isabella Rossi, a deliberate echo of Matteo's mother, a symbol of the past catching up, had been assembled to target organized crime in Naples, and Matteo Greco was their primary target. Rossi was relentless, her investigation meticulous, her methods unconventional. Bianca, initially unaware of the full extent of the threat, noticed a subtle shift in Matteo's demeanor. He became more withdrawn, more guarded, spending long hours in meetings with Giovanni and his legal advisors, his face etched with concern. One evening, as they were having dinner on the terrace, Bianca decided to confront him. "Something is wrong," she said, her voice filled with concern. "Tell me what is happening." Matteo hesitated, his gaze avoiding hers. "It's complicated," he said. "I am not a child, Matteo," Bianca said, her voice firm. "I deserve to know. We are in this together, remember?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There is an investigation," he said. "A serious one. They are targeting me, my businesses, my everything." Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the power of the law, the resources at their disposal. If they were determined to bring Matteo down, it would be a difficult fight, a fight that could cost them everything. "Who is leading the investigation?" she asked. "Her name is Isabella Rossi," Matteo said, his voice tinged with a mixture of anger and something else. Something that sounded like respect. "She is formidable, and she is relentless." The name resonated with Bianca, a reminder of Matteo's mother, of the past that continued to haunt them. It was a cruel irony, a twist of fate that seemed to mock their attempts to build a new future. "What can we do?" Bianca asked, her voice filled with a sense of urgency. Matteo looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "We need to be careful," he said. "We need to be smart. And we need to adapt." He explained his plan, a complex strategy involving legal maneuvering, counter-surveillance, and the cultivation of informants within the task force itself. It was a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble that could either protect them or lead to their downfall. Bianca listened intently, her mind racing. She understood the risks, the potential consequences. But she also understood the necessity of fighting back, of protecting what they had built, of preserving their love, their future. "I will help you," she said, her voice firm. "In any way I can." Matteo smiled, a slow, grateful smile. "I know you will," he said. "You are my strength, Bianca. My salvation." Over the next few weeks, Bianca became deeply involved in Matteo's efforts to counter the investigation. She used her own connections, her own knowledge of the city's elite, to gather information, to identify potential allies, to uncover weaknesses in Rossi's case. She discovered that Rossi was driven not just by a sense of justice, but by a personal vendetta. Her father, a police officer, had been killed years ago, a victim of organized crime. She had dedicated her life to bringing down the families who had destroyed her family. Bianca felt a pang of empathy for Rossi, a recognition of the shared pain of loss, of the desire for justice. But she also knew that Rossi's vendetta, her relentless pursuit of Matteo, threatened everything she held dear. One evening, as Bianca and Matteo were working late in his study, reviewing documents, analyzing data, strategizing their next move, Matteo suddenly stopped, his gaze fixed on a particular file. This is interesting," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. He showed Bianca the file, a report on Rossi's background, her career, her personal life. There was a detail, a small, seemingly insignificant piece of information that caught Bianca's attention. "She has a brother," Bianca said, her voice barely a whisper. A brother who was involved in illegal activities. Matteo nodded, his eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. It seems Investigator Rossi has a vulnerability, he said. A secret she would rather keep hidden. He looked at Bianca, his expression hardening.
We can use this, he said.
We can leverage it. We can force her to back down. Bianca felt a surge of unease. She understood the need to fight fire with fire, to use any means necessary to protect themselves. But this felt different. This felt like crossing a line, like stooping to the level of their enemies. Are you sure about this, Matteo? She asked, her voice hesitant. This could backfire. It could make things worse. Matteo met her gaze, his eyes filled with a cold determination. We have no choice, Bianca, he said. We are fighting for our survival. We must use every weapon at our disposal. He paused, his expression softening slightly. I know it is not ideal, he said. But it is necessary. We will do this to protect us. To make a statement. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Trust me, Bianca, he said. I know what I am doing. He had made his choice. And she was with him. They formed a pact, in the dim light of the study. Forged to protect them, no matter what. Chapter 16. The Lioness Uncaged. The decision to exploit Rossi's vulnerability weighed heavily on Bianca. She wrestled with her conscience, torn between her loyalty to Matteo and her own sense of morality. She understood the need to protect themselves, but the idea of using someone's personal life, their family, as a weapon felt wrong. She tried to rationalize it, to convince herself that it was a necessary evil, a means to an end. But the doubt lingered, a nagging voice that whispered in the back of her mind, questioning their actions, their choices. Matteo, sensing her unease, tried to reassure her. It's just a tactic, Bianca, he said. A way to gain leverage. We won't hurt her brother. We just need to persuade her to back off. But Bianca knew that in their world, persuasion often involved coercion, intimidation, even violence. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a line, that they were becoming the very thing they were fighting against. Despite her reservations, she played her part. She used her social connections to gather information on Rossi's brother, uncovering details about his illicit activities, his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. She compiled a dossier, a comprehensive file that could be used to destroy his life, to ruin his reputation, to force his sister's hand. It was a dirty business, a descent into the murky depths of their world, a world where secrets were currency, where loyalty was a commodity, where betrayal was a constant threat. Bianca felt a growing sense of disillusionment, a weariness with the constant struggle, the constant fear, the constant darkness. One evening, as she was working late in the study, reviewing the dossier on Rossi's brother, she came across a photograph, a candid shot of the brother with his family, his wife, his young children. They looked happy, carefree, unaware of the danger that loomed over them, unaware of the role they were playing in this deadly game. Bianca stared at the photograph, her heart aching. She saw her own reflection in the faces of those children, a reminder of the innocence that had been lost, the innocence that she herself had lost. She had become a player in this world, a participant in its brutal rituals, a woman who had traded her morality for survival. She closed the file, her hands trembling. She couldn't do it. She couldn't be a part of this, not anymore. She had reached her limit, her breaking point. She found Matteo in his office, his face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen, his eyes focused on the complex web of data, the intricate network of alliances and rivalries that define their world. I can't do this, Matteo, she said, her voice firm, resolute. He looked up, surprised by her tone, his eyes questioning. What do you mean? He asked. This plan, Bianca said, gesturing towards the file. Using Rossi's brother. It's wrong. It's immoral. Matteo frowned, his expression hardening. It's necessary, Bianca, he said. We have no choice. We always have a choice, Bianca said, her voice rising. We can choose to be better.
We can choose to rise above this.
Rise above what? Matteo asked, his voice laced with anger. Above survival? above protecting what is ours, above love. Love is not about this, Bianca said, her voice trembling. Love is not about hurting innocent people. Love is not about destroying lives. Matteo stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked towards her, his presence filling the room, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and hurt. You don't understand, Bianca, he said. You don't understand our world. You don't understand the sacrifices we have to make. I understand more than you think, Bianca said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I understand that we are losing ourselves. We are becoming monsters. She turned and walked towards the door, her heart aching, her mind made up. I am done, she said. I am done with this life. I am done with this world. Matteo stared at her, his expression stunned, his voice caught in his throat. Bianca, he said, his voice barely a whisper. What are you saying? I am saying goodbye, Bianca said, her voice filled with a profound sadness, a sense of loss, a glimmer of hope. She walked out of the room, leaving Matteo alone in his office, surrounded by the symbols of his power, the remnants of his empire, the echoes of his love. She was walking away from the only man she had ever truly loved, and she felt a sense of freedom. She was a lioness uncaged. Chapter 17. Echoes of Loyalty and Deceit. Bianca's departure sent shockwaves through the villa. The staff, accustomed to her quiet presence and growing influence, whispered among themselves, speculating about the reasons behind her sudden disappearance. Giovanni, ever loyal to Matteo, was visibly distressed, his concern for his Don mixed with a sense of bewilderment at Bianca's actions. Matteo, however, retreated into himself, his emotions a tightly controlled storm raging beneath a surface of icy calm. He refused to speak about Bianca, to acknowledge her absence, to even utter her name. He threw himself into his work, immersing himself in the details of his business, the intricacies of his defenses against the relentless investigation led by Isabella Rossi. But the investigation was closing in. Rossi, driven by her personal vendetta and fueled by a growing body of evidence, was tightening the net around Matteo, targeting his associates, seizing his assets, building a case that threatened to bring down his entire empire. Matteo, despite his outward calm, was increasingly aware of the precariousness of his situation. He had lost Bianca, the woman who had become his anchor, his confidant, his strength. And he had lost his way, his moral compass, his sense of purpose. He was a ship adrift in a storm, battered by the waves, threatened by the rocks, with no safe harbor in sight. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, staring at the empty chair where Bianca used to sit, Giovanni entered, his face grave, his eyes filled with concern. "Da Matteo," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we have a problem." Matteo looked up, his expression weary, his eyes filled with a deep-seated sadness. "What is it, Giovanni?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's Rossi," Giovanni said. She's made a move. She's arrested several of our men. She's threatening to indict them. And she's offering them a deal. Matteo's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. "A deal?" he asked, his voice laced with anger. Giovanni nodded. "She's offering them immunity," he said. "In exchange for testimony. Testimony against you." Matteo felt a chill run down his spine. Betrayal. It was the constant threat in their world, the serpent that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. But this was different. This was a betrayal orchestrated by the law, a betrayal that could bring down his entire empire, a betrayal that could send him to prison for the rest of his life. "Who?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Who has betrayed me?" Giovanni hesitated, his gaze flickering towards the empty chair where Bianca used to sit. We don't know for sure," he said. "But there are rumors, whispers, that someone close to you has been cooperating with Rossi." Matteo's heart sank. He knew, without a doubt, who Giovanni was referring to. Bianca. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, the woman who had walked away from him. Had she betrayed him? Had she turned against him? Had she used him? The thought was like a knife twisting in his gut, a pain that was both physical and emotional. He had opened himself up to her, had shared his vulnerabilities, his secrets, his love. And she had betrayed him. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the dark, stormy night outside. The rain was falling, relentless, unforgiving, mirroring the turmoil in his soul. "Find her," he said, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "Find Bianca. And bring her to me." Giovanni nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and pity. He knew what this meant. He knew what Matteo was capable of. He knew that Bianca, the woman who had once held his Don's heart, was now a target, an enemy, a threat that had to be eliminated. As Giovanni left the room, Matteo remained at the window, staring into the darkness, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, hurt, regret, and a lingering, undeniable love. He had made a pact with himself and with darkness. He had chosen power, control, vengeance, and with his actions and choices, everything had crumbled, again. And as the rain continued to lash, memories flooded his mind.
Bianca.
Her voice, her touch, the way she had looked at him. Was it all a lie? And he knew that he had lost his soul. He had lost everything that ever really mattered. And it was all his fault. Chapter 18. The Unmasking of Hearts. The hunt for Bianca was swift and efficient. Giovanni, using his network of informants and his intimate knowledge of Matteo's operations, quickly located her. She had not gone far, seeking refuge in a small, secluded apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the opulence and the dangers of the villa. She had sought a simple life, an attempt to live again, truly live. Giovanni, accompanied by two of his most trusted men, arrived at the apartment late one evening. They found Bianca alone, reading a book by the soft glow of a lamp. She looked up, surprised by their sudden appearance, her eyes widening with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Giovanni," she said, her voice calm, steady. "I expected you." Giovanni nodded, his expression grim. "Don Matteo requests your presence," he said. His tone was professional, but he couldn't hide the subtle sadness in his eyes. Bianca closed her book, marking her place with a delicate ribbon. She stood up, her movements graceful, her posture defiant. "I will not go," she said. Giovanni sighed, his hand resting on the gun hidden beneath his jacket. "You have no choice, Signora," he said. "You know how this works." Bianca met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I know how your world works, Giovanni," she said, "but I am no longer a part of it." "You were always a part of it," he quietly replied, "whether you accepted it or not." "And Matteo?" Bianca asked. "What does he believe?" Giovanni looked away.
Bianca smiled.
It was a sad smile, a knowing one. "He thinks I betrayed him, doesn't he?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Giovanni hesitated, his gaze flickering towards his men, then back to Bianca. "There is evidence," he said. "Indications. That you cooperated with Rossi." Bianca laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Evidence?" she repeated. "What evidence? Whispers? Rumors? The lies of desperate men trying to save their own skins?" Giovanni remained silent, his expression unreadable. He knew, deep down, that Bianca was not a traitor. He had seen her loyalty, her courage, her love for Matteo. But he was also a soldier, bound by duty, by obedience, by the code of their world. "I did not betray him, Giovanni," Bianca said, her voice firm, resolute. "I left him because I could no longer condone his actions, because I could no longer live in his world. But I would never betray him." She paused, her gaze searching Giovanni's eyes. "You know me, Giovanni," she said. "You know my heart. You know the truth." Giovanni looked at her, his eyes filled with a conflict, a struggle between his loyalty to Matteo and his own sense of justice. He knew, in his gut, that Bianca was telling the truth. He knew that she was innocent, but he also knew that Matteo was consumed by rage, by betrayal, by a need for vengeance. He knew that Matteo would not listen to reason, that he would not believe Bianca, that he would punish her. He made a decision, a risky, desperate gamble that could cost him his life. He turned to his men, his voice firm, commanding.
"Leave us," he said.
"Wait outside." The men hesitated, surprised by his order, but they obeyed, leaving Giovanni and Bianca alone in the apartment. Giovanni turned back to Bianca, his expression softening. "I believe you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "But Don Matteo, he is not himself. He is blinded by anger, by hurt." Bianca nodded, her eyes filled with tears.
"I know," she said.
"And I understand. But I will not let him kill me. Not for something I did not do." Giovanni reached into his jacket, but instead of pulling out his gun, he pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to Bianca.
"This is a contact," he said.
"Someone who can help you. Someone who can get you out of the city, out of the country, out of reach." Bianca stared at the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. Giovanni was betraying Matteo, risking his own life to save hers.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?"
Giovanni smiled. A sad, weary smile.
"Because it is the right thing to do," he said. "And because I believe in you. I believe in love. Something Don Matteo has forgotten." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "Go, Bianca," he said. "Go and live your life. Find the peace you deserve. And try to forgive him. Forgive us for what we have become." He turned to leave, and Bianca reached out. She grasped his arm.
"Giovanni," she said.
"Thank you." He nodded. "I will buy you as much time as I can. But go.
Go now.
He will find out and he will send others." Bianca nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude, fear, and a lingering, undeniable love for the man she was leaving behind. The man who had both saved and destroyed her. She gathered a few belongings, small things of personal value, and left the apartment, melting into the night. She had a second chance at life, a chance to escape, to find peace. But she could not shake off the image of Matteo, the pain, the anger in his eyes. And she wondered if he was too far gone, or if someday he would find his own redemption. She hoped, for his sake, that he would. But she couldn't wait for him. She had to live her life, now. Chapter 19. A Kingdom of Ashes and Hope. Matteo's world crumbled around him. Giovanni's betrayal, although motivated by a twisted sense of justice, was a devastating blow. It shattered the last vestiges of trust within his inner circle, leaving him isolated, paranoid, and increasingly reliant on brute force to maintain control. The investigation, fueled by the information that Rossi had seemingly obtained from a confidential source which Matteo still believed to be Bianca, closed in relentlessly. His businesses were raided, his assets frozen, his associates arrested. The empire he had built, the legacy he had fought so hard to protect, was dissolving into ashes. He became a recluse, holed up in the villa, surrounded by a dwindling number of loyal guards, his only companions the ghosts of his past and the bitter taste of regret. He drank heavily, his nights haunted by nightmares, his days filled with a gnawing sense of emptiness, of loss. He thought of Bianca constantly, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, hurt, yes, but also a lingering, undeniable love. He remembered her strength, her intelligence, her unwavering sense of morality. He remembered the way she had looked at him, the way she had touched him, the way she had believed in him. He began to question himself, his choices, his actions. He began to see the darkness that had consumed him, the ruthlessness that had become his defining characteristic. He began to understand, with a chilling clarity, that he had become the very thing he had always despised, the very thing he had sworn to fight against. One rainy evening, as he sat alone in his study, staring at the empty chair where Bianca used to sit, he reached a breaking point. He smashed his glass against the fireplace, the shards scattering across the floor, a reflection of the shattered remnants of his life. He picked up the phone, his hand trembling, and dialed a number he hadn't dialed in years, a number that represented a past he had tried to bury, a past that had now come back to haunt him. The phone rang several times before it was answered. A woman's voice, hesitant, uncertain, spoke. "Hello?" Matteo took a deep breath, his voice hoarse, his heart pounding in his chest. "Isabella?" he said. It's Matteo." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence filled with shock, disbelief, and a flicker of something else. Something that sounded like hope. "Matteo?" Isabella Rossi said, her voice trembling. "Is it really you?" "It's me," Matteo said, his voice cracking. I need your help." He explained everything, his voice raw with emotion, his words tumbling out in a torrent of confession, regret, and a desperate plea for redemption. He told her about Bianca, about Giovanni, about the investigation, about the lies, the betrayals, the darkness that had consumed him. He told her that he had been wrong, that Bianca was innocent, that she had never betrayed him. He told her that he had lost his way, that he had become a monster, that he wanted to change. Isabella listened in silence, her heart aching for the man he had become, for the boy he had once been, for the family she had lost. She had dedicated her life to bringing him down, to avenging her father's death, to destroying the empire he had built. But now, hearing his voice, hearing the pain, the regret, the hope in his words, she felt a shift in her own heart, a crack in the armor of her hatred, a glimmer of forgiveness. "What do you want me to do, Matteo?" she asked, her voice soft, her tone uncertain. "I want to surrender," Matteo said, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to confess. I want to pay for my crimes. But I need your help. I need you to protect me. From my own people. From myself." Isabella hesitated, her mind racing. This was a trap, a trick, a desperate attempt to save himself. But what if it wasn't? What if he was sincere? What if he was truly changing? She made a decision, a risky, dangerous gamble that could either lead to justice or to her own destruction. "I will help you, Matteo," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "But on my terms. You will cooperate fully. You will tell me everything. You will testify. Against everyone." Matteo nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I will," he said. "I will do anything. Just help me end this." And so, a new pact was forged, a pact not of darkness, but of light, a pact not of vengeance, but of redemption. Matteo Greco, the ruthless Don, the feared leader of a criminal empire, surrendered to the law, to the woman who had sworn to destroy him, to the woman who, in a strange, twisted way, represented his only hope for salvation. He was turning himself in, and a new world was about to begin. One built on truth, not fear. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Matteo's surrender sent shockwaves through Naples, shattering the illusion of his invincibility and sending his remaining loyalists scrambling for cover. The news dominated headlines, whispered in hushed tones in cafes and trattorias, and sparked a frenzy of speculation and fear within the underworld. The villa, once a symbol of power and opulence, became a fortress under siege, surrounded by police vehicles, swarming with investigators, its opulent rooms echoing with the footsteps of law enforcement officials meticulously gathering evidence. Matteo, stripped of his power, his wealth, his freedom, was confined to a holding cell, awaiting trial. He had confessed to everything, detailing his crimes, naming his associates, exposing the intricate web of corruption and violence that had sustained his empire for so long. His testimony was a devastating blow to organized crime in Naples, leading to a wave of arrests, indictments, and convictions. The city, long held in the grip of fear, began to breathe again, to hope for a future free from the suffocating influence of the mafia. But Matteo's actions had also created new enemies, powerful figures who had been implicated in his testimony, figures who sought revenge, who wanted him silenced, who were willing to do anything to prevent him from taking the stand. Isabella Rossi, aware of the threats against Matteo's life, took extraordinary measures to protect him. She moved him to a secret location, a heavily guarded safe house, where he was kept under constant surveillance, his every move monitored, his every contact scrutinized. She visited him often, their conversations a strange mixture of interrogation and something else. something that resembled respect, understanding, even a flicker of compassion. They were two sides of the same coin, two individuals shaped by the same world, two souls scarred by the same violence, two hearts yearning for redemption. One evening, as they sat across from each other in the sterile, impersonal confines of the safe house, Isabella looked at Matteo, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something that looked like pity. "Why did you do it, Matteo?" she asked, her voice soft, her tone gentle. "Why did you surrender? You could have escaped. You could have disappeared." Matteo looked at her, his face etched with weariness, his eyes filled with a deep-seated sadness. "I was tired, Isabella," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Tired of running. Tired of fighting. Tired of the darkness." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the window, towards the distant lights of the city he had once ruled, the city he had now betrayed. "I lost my way," he said, his voice cracking. "I became a monster. I hurt so many people, including the woman I loved." He looked back at Isabella, his eyes filled with tears. "I did it for her," he said. "For Bianca.
To prove to her that I could change.
That I could be better. That love is stronger than hate." Isabella nodded, her heart aching for the man he had become, for the boy he had once been, for the life he had lost. She had spent years hating him, pursuing him, wanting to destroy him. But now, seeing him stripped of his power, his arrogance, his mask, she saw only a broken man, a man seeking redemption, a man yearning for forgiveness.
"And Bianca?"
Isabella asked, her voice hesitant. "Do you know where she is?" Matteo shook his head, his eyes filled with a profound sadness.
"No," he said. "She's gone.
She left me. And I don't blame her." Isabella reached across the table and gently touched his hand, her fingers brushing against his. It was a gesture of comfort, of understanding, of a shared humanity. "She may come back, Matteo," she said, her voice soft, her tone hopeful. "Love is a powerful force. It can overcome anything, even this." Matteo looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "Do you believe that, Isabella?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper.
Isabella smiled. A sad, weary smile.
"I want to believe it," she said. "I have to believe it. Otherwise, what's the point?" They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of the city. They were two enemies, two adversaries, two individuals bound together by a shared past, a shared tragedy, a shared hope. The final confrontation was not a battle of guns or wills, but a quiet reckoning of hearts and loyalties. Matteo had confronted his demons, his past, his own soul. He had chosen truth over lies, justice over vengeance, love over hate. He was ready to face the consequences of his actions, to pay the price for his crimes, to start anew. He had lost everything, his empire, his freedom, his love. But he had also gained something precious, something invaluable. He had gained himself. And he held on to this, as he stood, awaiting his trial. He was a changed man. And no matter the outcome, he could finally see some light. Epilogue. The trial was a media circus, a spectacle of justice and retribution. Matteo, dressed in a simple suit, his face pale but resolute, stood before the court and pleaded guilty to all charges. He spoke with a quiet dignity, his voice devoid of emotion, his eyes fixed on the judge. He recounted his crimes, his voice unwavering, his testimony a chilling indictment of the world he had once ruled. He named names, exposed secrets, detailed the intricate web of corruption and violence that had permeated every level of Neapolitan society. His testimony sent shockwaves through the city, leading to further arrests, indictments, and a sweeping reform of the police force and the judiciary. The old order was crumbling, replaced by a new era of accountability, transparency, and hope. Bianca, having followed the trial from afar, reading the news reports, watching the televised proceedings, felt a mixture of emotions. Relief, sadness, regret, and a lingering, undeniable love for the man she had left behind. She had found peace in her new life, a quiet existence in a small, picturesque village far from the chaos and the dangers of Naples. She had returned to her art, finding solace in the beauty of the landscape, the simplicity of her surroundings, the freedom of expression. But she could not forget Matteo, the man who had both captivated and terrified her, the man who had shown her both the darkness and the light within himself. She had witnessed his transformation, his willingness to confront his past, his courage to choose justice over self-preservation. She wondered if he had truly changed, if he had truly found redemption. She wondered if there was a future for them, a future free from the shadows of their past, a future built on love and forgiveness. One sunny afternoon, as she was sitting on the terrace of her small cottage, overlooking the rolling hills and the sparkling sea, she saw a figure approaching, a familiar figure, a figure that made her heart beat faster, her breath catch in her throat. It was Matteo. He was thinner, his face lined with weariness, but his eyes were different. They were softer, gentler, filled with a light she had not seen before, a light of hope. He stopped before her, his gaze searching hers, his expression uncertain. "Bianca," he said, his voice hoarse, his tone hesitant. "Matteo," she replied, her voice trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. They stood there for a moment, their eyes locked, their souls communicating in a language that transcended words, a language of love, loss, forgiveness, and redemption. I was released," Matteo said, his voice breaking. They gave me a reduced sentence. For cooperating." Bianca nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I know," she said. "I followed the trial." "I understand why you left," Matteo said, his voice filled with regret. I don't blame you. I was a monster." "You were not a monster, Matteo," Bianca said, her voice firm. "You were lost. But you found your way back." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. It was a gesture she had known, one she had longed for. "I did it for you, Bianca," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I did it all for you, to prove to you that I could change, that I could be worthy of your love." Bianca leaned into his touch, her body relaxing against his, the years of separation, of pain, of fear, melting away. "I never stopped loving you, Matteo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close, his heart pounding against hers. They stood there, bathed in the warm sunlight, surrounded by the beauty of their surroundings, their love a beacon of hope in a world that had once seemed so dark, so unforgiving. Can we start again?" Matteo asked, his voice trembling. "Can we have a future together?" Bianca smiled and kissed him, a kiss long overdue. "Yes," she said. The future was uncertain. The scars of the past would always remain, but they had found each other again, two souls redeemed, two hearts reunited, two lovers ready to embrace a new beginning, a new life, a new love. They had built a new kingdom, not of ashes and power, but one of hope, starting with just the two of them. The end.